This story contains sensitive content that may be disturbing to some viewers. It is a true life story, and while the events are real, all names have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. Viewer discretion is advised. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to this channel. This story is unlike anything you've ever heard, and trust me, you won't want to miss a second of it. Now let's begin. I wish I could tell you I was always a bad person. That I always had the capability of doing what I did. That it was in my nature to betray the one person who loved me unconditionally. But I wasn't, and it wasn't. Once upon a time, I was a devoted wife, a loving mother, a woman who believed in vows, in trust, in forever. And then somehow, I wasn't anymore. I can still remember the first time I saw James Marshall. It was the kind of moment that people write about in romance novels, effortless, perfect, magnetic. We were in New York, just two strangers on a date that felt like destiny. I had never met someone who understood me so easily, who made me laugh without trying. By the end of that night, I knew, if I went on a second date with him, I would never date anyone else again. And I was right. We were inseparable. We traveled together, laughed together, built dreams together. It was the kind of love that made you believe in fairy tales. A year later, he proposed. The year after that, we were married. It was everything I had ever wanted, and for a while, it stayed that way. Then life happened. The first few years were bliss. We were still just as in love, still spending nights talking until the sun came up. Then we had our daughter Emma. She was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, a perfect combination of the two of us. And I remember thinking, this is it. This is happiness. But happiness is fragile. And sometimes it shatters before you even realize there's a crack. In 2016, I got pregnant with twins. We were overjoyed, ready to expand our family, to give Emma the siblings she had been begging for. We had names picked out. We had a nursery planned. Then we lost them. I can't even describe what that kind of loss does to a marriage. The way it changes the air in the house, turning love into something heavy and unspoken. James grieved in silence. He buried himself in work, in responsibilities, in pretending to be strong. I, on the other hand, felt like I was drowning. The house felt cold. I started to resent him for not being more emotional, for not holding me the way he used to. He resented me for always needing something from him when he had nothing left to give. The distance between us grew, and I should have fought harder. I should have clawed my way back to him, the way I promised I would in our vows. But I didn't. Instead, I let the resentment fester. And by the time I realized it, it was already too late, because that's when Stefan Duffy walked into my life. If you had told me that a man like Stefan Duffy could ruin me, I would have laughed in your face. He was just a coworker. Someone I saw at the office, exchanged polite small talk with. I barely noticed him at first, but he noticed me. Looking back, I realize how calculated he was. How he never made his interest obvious in the beginning. How he waited, watched, learned. It started with harmless compliments. You always have the best ideas in meetings. I don't know how you manage work and home life. You're incredible. James is a lucky guy. I should have recognized it for what it was. I should have shut it down. But I didn't, because for the first time in years, I felt seen. James had stopped noticing the little things about me, the way I wore my hair, the perfume I chose, the effort I put into looking nice. He was exhausted, he was emotionally drained, and I knew he loved me, but sometimes love isn't enough when you feel invisible. But Stefan noticed everything. The way he looked at me made me feel like I was desirable again. Like I wasn't just a wife or a mother or someone's responsibility. I was a woman who still had power. And that feeling? That was the beginning of my downfall. There's always a moment. A moment where you can still turn back, where the damage isn't done yet. And I had my moment in early 2018. We had just finished a late meeting at work. The office was empty. It was just me and Stefan. I remember standing by the elevator, scrolling through my phone, when he said something that made my heart stop. You know, if things were different, I think I'd be in love with you. I should have laughed it off. I should have reminded him that I was married, that this was completely inappropriate. Instead, I felt my face heat up. I didn't stop him when he stepped closer. I didn't move away when his fingers brushed my wrist, and when he finally leaned in to kiss me, I let him. It was just a kiss. That's what I told myself. It was meaningless. A moment of weakness. But what I didn't know then was that this moment would change my life forever. Because once you cross that line, once you taste that forbidden fruit, there's no going back. I should have stopped it after the first kiss. I should have walked away, pretended it never happened, gone home and confessed everything to James, begged for his forgiveness. But I didn't. Because the truth is, I didn't want to. After that first kiss, Stefan and I didn't talk about it for days. I told myself it was nothing, just a stupid moment that didn't mean anything. But the more I tried to convince myself, the more I caught myself thinking about it, replaying it in my mind. Feeling that rush of excitement all over again. At work, we acted normal, but I could feel the shift. The way his eyes lingered on me when no one was looking. The way I suddenly became hyper-aware of his presence. And then the flirtation started. Little things at first, jokes that had a double meaning. I don't know how James gets anything done at home with you around. A lingering touch when he handed me a file. A glance that lasted just a second too long. I could have shut it down, I could have ignored it, but instead I leaned into it. It made me feel alive. James and I barely spoke outside of the necessities, Emma's school, what groceries we needed, small talk about work, but Stefan? He hung on to every word I said. He noticed me. And once you start craving that kind of attention, it's impossible to stop. I still remember the exact moment I let go of any remaining hesitation. It was late. Everyone else had gone home. Stefan and I were in his office, pretending to work on a project we had already finished hours ago. I don't know who made the first move, but suddenly he was in front of me. Close. Too close. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. I opened my mouth. The words never came. And then he kissed me. This time, there was no hesitation. No pulling away. No pretending it was just an accident. This time I kissed him back. And this time, we didn't stop at just a kiss. It didn't happen all at once. It built up slowly, deliberately, like a fire that had been smoldering for months. That night, we crossed every line. His hands on me, my breath catching, the way my body responded in ways I hadn't felt in years. And then, just as quickly as it had started, it was over. I sat there afterward, my heart racing, knowing I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. But instead of feeling regret, all I felt was addicted. I wish I could say I felt guilty. Then I cried on the way home. That I hated myself for what I had done. But the truth is, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. Stefan brought back something I thought I had lost forever, the feeling of being wanted. So, I justified it. It's just a distraction. It's just excitement. It doesn't mean I love James any less. I told myself these lies over and over until I started believing them. And once you start lying to yourself, lying to everyone else becomes easy. We found ways to see each other without suspicion. Lunch breaks that lasted too long, stolen moments in empty conference rooms, late-night messages that I deleted the second I read them. We mastered the art of secrecy, and the more we got away with, the bolder we became. The first time we got a hotel, it felt surreal. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing. It was planned, thought out, deliberate. I remember getting dressed that morning knowing exactly what I was about to do. I told James I had a work event. I kissed Emma goodbye. And then I drove to meet Stefan in a hotel on the other side of town, where no one would recognize us. The moment I walked through that door, I knew this wasn't just an affair anymore. This was a second life. I remember the nervousness, the way my hands shook as I set my bag down, the way Stefan watched me, waiting, giving me one last chance to change my mind. But I didn't. I let it happen. And once you let something like that happen once, it becomes easier every time after. For months, it was perfect. The stolen kisses, the secret rendezvous, the rush of knowing we were doing something forbidden. I had never felt more desired in my life. But then, the guilt started creeping in. I'd come home and look at James, and for the first time I noticed him. The way he had aged in the past few years. The way he looked tired all the time. The way he still kissed me goodnight, even though I barely kissed him back. I started wondering, was he ever suspicious? Did he notice the way I suddenly kept my phone glued to me? Did he sense that I was different? But every time guilt threatened to take over, Stefan pulled me back in. I need you. I think about you all the time. I don't know what I'd do if we ever stopped. And I fell for it. Every single time. Then came the bombshell. I was pregnant. James's child. I should have seen it as a sign, a wake-up call, a reason to finally stop. For a moment, I convinced myself I would. I told Stefan we needed to cool things down. I stopped responding as quickly. I tried to focus on my family, but Stefan? He didn't let me go so easily. You're the only thing that makes me feel alive. I can't do this without you. I love you. And those words, those damn words, they were the reason that instead of ending things, we only got worse. I thought I had control. I told myself that I was managing everything perfectly, that my two lives could exist side by side, and no one would ever know. That I could be a good wife, a loving mother, and still keep this secret world hidden beneath the surface. But the deeper I fell, the harder it became to hold everything together. Because the truth is, you can only live a double life for so long before it starts to consume you. By 2019, my affair with Stefan Duffy wasn't just a reckless indulgence anymore. It was a full-blown addiction. I had mastered the art of deception. The little white lies, the perfectly crafted alibis, late meetings, work trips, errands that took too long. I became an expert at covering my tracks. I kept my phone on silent, deleted messages the second I read them, memorized fake excuses in case James ever questioned where I had been. But lying to James was the easy part. Lying to myself, that was getting harder. Because even though I told myself this was just something physical, a distraction, something that didn't really mean anything, I started to need Stefan in a way that terrified me. Stefan and I had gotten comfortable. The thrill of sneaking around made us reckless. It wasn't just stolen kisses in cars or quick meetings in hotel rooms anymore. We started pushing the limits, longer getaways, riskier locations, texting when James was right next to me. I told myself I had everything under control, but deep down, I knew I was getting sloppy. There were close calls, moments when I almost forgot to delete a message, times when James would ask, "Who was that?" and I'd have to think fast. And then the worst part, the moment I realized I wasn't special. I had spent years believing that what Stefan and I had was something rare. That even though we were both cheating, our connection was different. But in 2019, something changed. I started noticing things. His attention started slipping. The way he looked at his phone a little too often. The nights he suddenly wasn't available. And then, the gut-wrenching truth. He was also building a life with his own wife. He had told me a million times that he wasn't really happy with her. That I was the one he wanted. That I was the one who made him feel alive. But I started realizing he was telling her the same thing. He wasn't some tortured soul who had fallen helplessly in love with me. He was a man who knew exactly how to play the game. And yet, even when I saw the truth, even when the jealousy burned in my chest, I still couldn't let him go. Then came 2020. The world shut down, offices closed, travel stopped. For the first time in years, Stefan and I were forced apart. At first, it felt unbearable. I was desperate to see him, to touch him, to feel that rush again. But all we had were text messages, late-night calls, stolen moments on FaceTime. And for a while I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe this is how it ends. But I underestimated us. Because the second things started to open up again in 2021, we ran right back to each other. The moment I saw Stefan again in 2021, it felt like I had been holding my breath for over a year. We met in a hotel room, just like before. But this time, it felt different. More desperate, more intense, more dangerous. Because during that year apart, I had convinced myself that he needed me as much as I needed him. That what we had wasn't just lust, but something deeper. But when I looked in his eyes, I saw it. I wasn't the only woman he had been missing. I tried to ignore it, to pretend it didn't matter. But the doubt had planted itself in my mind. And that's when the jealousy started to take over. I should have known better. I was a married woman with 2 children, having an affair for years. I had no right to feel possessive over him. But when I found out his wife was pregnant again, something inside me snapped. I wasn't just hurt. I was furious. How could you, after everything? He swore it was an accident, that he didn't really want another kid, that it was his wife pushing for it. I wanted to believe him, but deep down, I knew the truth. He wasn't mine. He never had been. I told myself I was done, that this was the final straw, and yet in 2022, we met in a hotel one last time. A final goodbye. That's what we told ourselves. We promised it was the end, that after 5 years it was finally over. And I believed it. I really did. But the thing about addiction, it doesn't just disappear. And even after we moved away, I still couldn't let him go. I thought I had it under control. Even after moving miles away, even after promising myself it was over, I still couldn't let him go. Stefan was still in my life, even if he wasn't physically next to me. I told myself it was harmless. That it wasn't the same now that we weren't meeting in hotels. That texting, FaceTiming, sending pictures wasn't as bad as what we had done before. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was still cheating. And I had no idea that I was only days away from losing everything. At first, after we moved, I did try to stop. For a few months, I cut back on messages. I ignored his late-night calls. I tried to focus on my family and pretend I could forget. But then, one text changed everything. "I miss you." That's all it took. Before I knew it, I was right back in the cycle. Late-night FaceTime calls when James was asleep, secret pictures sent in the middle of the day, messages that made my heart race, even though I knew I was playing with fire. I convinced myself that as long as we weren't physically together, it wasn't as bad. But I was lying to myself. Again. Because the reality, I was still choosing him. Over and over again. And I had no idea that James was about to find out everything. December 26th, 2024. The day my world exploded. It was the day after Christmas, and James had cooked dinner for everyone, me, the kids, and my mother, who was visiting for the holidays. Everything felt normal. I laughed, I played with the kids, I sat at the table with absolutely no idea that my entire life was about to change. Then it happened. I wasn't even in the room when he found my phone. 1 second, I was in the guest room chatting with my mom and the kids. The next, James was standing in the doorway, holding my phone in his hands. And I will never forget the way he looked at me, like he didn't even recognize the woman he had married. I froze. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might pass out. I knew. Before he even said a word, before he even turned the screen toward me, I knew what he had found. The messages, the pictures, the proof. And suddenly I couldn't breathe. "How long?" he asked. I couldn't answer. "How long have you been lying to me?" My mouth was dry. My entire body was shaking. Because what could I say? That it started with a kiss? That I had spent 7 years betraying him? That even after we moved, I had still chosen Stefan? There was no way to make it sound better. So I did what I always did. I lied. It wasn't serious. It was just texts. It didn't mean anything. But James saw right through me. Because this wasn't just about the messages. This was about years of deception. And I could see it in his face. This was breaking him. I begged. I swore I would cut Stefan off. That I would go to therapy. That I would do anything to save our marriage. I admitted the truth, but only in pieces. I told him it had started as flirting, then later admitted to the hotels. I told him it had ended before we moved, then later admitted that we had kept in touch. And with every lie that unraveled, I watched James slip further and further away from me. "Why?" he asked. And I didn't have an answer. Because there was no excuse. I had done this. I had destroyed us. And for the first time, I realized I might not be able to fix it. The days after were a blur. James barely spoke to me. The house felt like a war zone, silent, cold, unbearable. I could barely look at my kids without feeling like I was the worst mother in the world. And the guilt, it was suffocating. For the first time, I truly felt the weight of what I had done. Not just to James, not just to my family, but to myself. I had destroyed my own life. And the worst part, I had no one to blame but me. I started therapy. I cut Stefan off for good. I tried desperately to prove to James that I could change, but I knew some things can't be undone. Some wounds never heal. And even if James forgave me one day, things would never be the same. Because I wasn't the woman he thought he married anymore. I wasn't even sure who I was. I spent years believing I had everything under control. That I could live a double life, keep all my secrets, and never get caught. That I could be a good wife, a good mother, while still chasing something forbidden. But in the end, the truth always comes out. And as I sat there staring at the empty space in our bed where James used to sleep, I realized the most painful truth of all. I thought I had control over everything, until I lost everything that truly mattered. And that is how my world came crashing down. But let me ask you this. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Would you have confessed earlier? Do you think I deserved a second chance? Or was this betrayal unforgivable? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I need to hear what you think. And if you made it this far, I know you love gripping real-life stories just like this one. Subscribe right now because I promise the next story, it's even crazier. And if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button. It helps more people find these jaw-dropping stories. This isn't the end, there's more. So turn on that notification bell because trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.